What up, and welcome to Pound the Rock, an NBA podcast by theScore. We are brought to you today by Subway. I am joined in studio by the one and only Instagram celebrity, John Chick.
What's up, Wolfond?
And remotely by perpetual jet setter, Joseph Casciaro.
What's going on? Is Chick's Husky in the studio too? Speaking of incidents.
Yeah, I wish. It's coming down a lot of snow right now, which you're missing being in Los Angeles. The dog would love this.
I actually don't have Instagram, so I haven't seen any of the famed John Chick with his Husky videos, but I've heard great things.
You're missing some great
Blowing
sea
up.
entertainment.
Yeah, that's what I hear. We are, again, brought to you today by Subway. We have a new sort of video component to the podcast, which is going to be available on theScore's YouTube channel. I want to say thanks to Subway for providing us with some delicious sandwiches today. And Cash, wherever you are, your undisclosed location, I hope you're enjoying one as well. We're going to kick off today's show with a new segment. It's called Sweet versus Heat, brought to you by the team at Subway, whose new Sweet versus Heat chicken sandwiches are making people choose which side they're on. So for this segment, we're each going to nominate one player who we feel has demonstrated some particularly sweet moves, and one team that we feel is low-key on a bit of a hot streak. So we'll start with the sweet element of that equation. Cash, I'll start with you. Who do you feel has demonstrated some sweet moves as of late?
I'm going to start with Trae Young. I think a little bit of an under-the-radar pick because his team's not in the playoff mix and maybe people aren't watching Hawks games in late February of a lost season. But Trae, after kind of a slow start, really picked it up the last couple months. I think he's like shooting 40% from three over his last 33 games, going back to mid-December. So the thing that, was the reason he got drafted so high, the shooting is finally coming through at the NBA level. And I don't know if you guys saw, but he absolutely picked apart Blake Griffin and Reggie Bullock on a move. I think it was last week where he was driving to the hole. He goes between his legs from behind, then wraps it around Blake Griffin. And then he also had a sweet, against the Rockets earlier this week. He had a sweet pullback, kind of like step back, had the ball on a string, and he drained a three. He actually made 8 threes against the Rockets. So I'm going with Trae Young because I think he is a guy that was a little unfairly dismissed early in the season. People gave up on him real early because not gave up on him career-wise, but kind of gave up on his season because of how poorly he was shooting it early in the year, and everyone's comparing him to Luka Doncic, obviously, because of the draft day trade, and I still think the Hawks were insane for that. But give Young credit. He's developed over the course of his rookie season as opposed to hitting a wall and slowing down. He's kind of at the opposite kind of year most rookies have, and he's playing well and shooting the hell out of it right now.
Yeah, and if you haven't seen that move that Trae Young pulled on the Pistons, I highly recommend that you go and watch it now. It's pretty insane. It was Bruce Brown, who's also a rookie on the Pistons, who was guarding him. And
did I say Bruce Bowen?
I don't think you did.
I said okay.
But I think even Bruce Bowen would have been fooled by this move, honestly. Basically, they ran a high pick and roll with Trae Young and Dwayne Dedmon, and Trae faked a behind the back pass to Dedmon, and instead of completing that behind the back pass, instead just kind of threaded the ball back between his legs, and Bruce Brown got completely turned around, just looking in the complete opposite direction, and that turned the play into a 2-on-1 basically. And then from that point, Young basically faked an over-the-top lob to Dedmon to kind of freeze Blake Griffin, and then threaded a pass around him to Dedmon for a dunk. It was awesome, and as was that sort of pullback jumper that he hit over PJ Tucker. He's looked really good as of late, shooting the ball. Obviously, his passing stood out, I think, from the jump, but his ball handling, I think, has also really come along nicely, and I think there's a lot of founded hope that he is going to be an elite offensive player for a long time. And I just think the second half that he is having is really encouraging. And the Hawks as a team have been playing pretty well for a while now. So, I think there's a lot of reasons to watch that team right now, actually, because John Collins has been great. Kevin Huerter has been playing really well. And I think, you throw another high draft pick into the mix, and that is going to be a team to watch going forward.
Yeah, I mean, Trey's got some of that Steph Curry that people were trying to make the connection to before he came into the NBA. Drilled like a 40-footer the other night. That team's got a lot of stuff to figure out. Obviously, they're very young, but that backcourt with Trae Young and Kevin Huerter be interesting. John Collins as well.
I also think it just seems like we say this every year. We're always maybe overly impressed with the rookie class that we see because we don't tend to expect too much of rookies. But this is the best rookie class that I can remember in a long time. Between Young, Doncic, Marvin Bagley, who's also been outstanding, DeAndre Ayton, Jaren Jackson, who might be done for the season, but was obviously looking pretty special when he was playing in Memphis. Am I wrong to think that this is the best rookie class that we've seen in a really long time?
I think you're on the right track there for sure. When's the last time you had this many players? I think we know who the rookie of the year is going to be, but this kind of talent come out. Last year you had, De'Aaron Fox, Alonzo Ball. Obviously we know what happened with Markelle Fultz. So in recent memory, yeah, you're right.
Another thing with Trey too, just quick kind of stat. Second Spectrum had tweeted this out, but that game I was talking about against the Rockets earlier this week when you went 8 for 12 from deep, if you take the average distance of his 3-point makes in that game, it was the longest for a player in 6 years in a single game. So more than longer distances than Steph on average for his 3-point makes in that game.
Wow.
The guy, not that it's any surprise, but the guy can flat out shoot from anywhere.
Yep.
Yeah, we saw that from him in college, obviously, and I think it's funny because to start his NBA career, he really wasn't shooting the ball very well at all. He was shooting 26% from three, I think, through his first 30-odd games. So it's nice to see him shooting it well and kind of adding that to his complement of other offensive abilities. So let's move on to Chick. Who have you been watching, and what sweet moves have you been seeing?
So I haven't really watched or didn't watch for most of the beginning of the season a lot of the Kings, and then they started to play well. I'm all in on De'Aaron Fox now, and his kind of lightning fast dribble misdirection is some of the craziest stuff I've seen. I just watching him in the last couple weeks. This guy, his ability to change hands in traffic. This is like watching ancient video, Barry Sanders play football sometimes. He's and it's I guess the comparison could be made to Kyrie with that kind of ability as a point guard, but obviously he's got a different body type. Kyrie's got a lower center of gravity. What makes watching De'Aaron so crazy is he's skinny. He's got that Ninja Turtles headband on, and he's just chaotic out there. But he's controlled chaos, His jab step the other night on Derrick Rose basically put Derrick Rose into the front row. And the Kings lost that game, but yeah, he's one of the most exciting players in the league right now, I think. And I think he's a big part of the Kings' success. We know what Buddy Hield's been doing. We know some of the ingredients they've got. If they make the playoffs, he's going to be a big reason why.
Yeah, and first let me just say I'm all in on those Ninja Turtle headbands. I think,
it's fantastic.
I think it's a great look.
It's a great trend.
But obviously, I don't know how many players are faster with the ball in their hands than De'Aaron Fox at this point in time.
Yeah.
He just goes end-to-end so fast. And what's really impressed me about him is just how fast he's able to move while remaining kind of under control. And the Kyrie comparison is interesting. He's faster than Kyrie. He also doesn't have nearly the handle that Kyrie has, but I also think that he's a better passer. And his passing actually is what has stood out to me, I think, at a lot of points in time. He makes these one-handed skip passes that are just absolute lasers. And I think he's got vision. It's incredible how dramatically he has changed the outlook of that Kings franchise. If we think of where they were, or where we thought they were even at the start of this season, compared to how we're looking at this team now, it's pretty incredible the turnaround that he has managed to engineer.
Yeah, we came into the season thinking the Kings, as usual, were the most, even if not dysfunctional, although they probably were, but just the saddest team in the NBA. They had the darkest future. They didn't seem to have any blue chip prospects, and they didn't own their own first rounder this year. And then, yeah, sure, other guys have obviously stepped up. Buddy Hield's having a great year. Marvin Bagley's a good rookie. Yelitsa shot the ball well for them. Cauley Stein's made some improvements, but the engine of it all is De'Aaron Fox, and like his star turn has really turned the Kings into a team that now suddenly has one of the, like, you can say they have one of the best young cores in the league, and he's kind of the head of that snake. And, you know, he looks like an all-star in the making, and it's pretty wild to see, given what he looked like last year. And, you know, not that he looked like a wasted pick or anything, but he looked really far off from even being a competent NBA guard. And now he looks like a budding star. It's kind of crazy.
And probably another good reminder just not to give up on these young point guards too early, because in his rookie year, Fox was, I think he flashed a lot of ability, but he was also a bit of a mess and didn't quite know what he was doing on the floor. Like his advanced metrics were some of the absolute worst in the NBA.
Yeah.
And I just think this is a good reminder that these players are not fully formed, and what we see of them now is not what they're going to be. So, you know, whether it's a player like Colin Sexton or, you know, even Trae Young, I just think it's important to remember that they have a lot of room to grow, and we're going to be seeing, I think, much different players than these in a couple of years. So,
yeah, but rookies usually suck, essentially, and especially it's kind of what it is.
Yeah, I think the Sexton comparison's interesting too, because I think he's going to be much better than what you've seen. But, you know, there's a real learning curve with playing NBA point guard. I don't know if it's on par with NFL quarterback, but it's the same kind of idea, you know. Yeah, I mean, you know, the Kings in 2017 looked like they were going nowhere. They traded Boogie for Buddy Hield, and then they drafted De'Aaron Fox, who was a raw player. But look at them now, right? I mean, yeah, this is a hell of a story.
The guy I've been watching is Paul George. Not exactly like a sleeper pick or anything like that. He's been getting a lot of love, deservedly so. But I think there are so many subtleties to his game that you don't really pick up on until you watch him for a long time. And I've been watching a lot of Paul George lately. I wrote about him recently. And his handle to me has just gotten so much. It's not even just that it's gotten tighter, but it's gotten so much more varied. And he has all these different moves and counter moves. And in particular, like, he is one of the most effective players at using the behind the back dribble. Not just as like a flashy move, but one that has a lot of utility. And if you watch him a lot, you'll just see he uses that on almost every time down the floor, and he uses it in a way that helps him keep his dribble alive. He has the lowest turnover rate of his career this year, and one of the absolute lowest turnover rates for any player that has a usage rate as high as he is. I think it's just him, Kawhi Leonard, and Anthony Davis who have usage rates over 29% and turnover rates below 10%. He's really hard to push off of the ball, and I just love how he uses that dribble to kind of get to his spots. And also, like, if he is kind of turned away at the initial point of attack, he keeps that dribble alive, and he'll sort of probe and wait for a seam to open up. And he ends up kind of putting together these probing serpentine drives that get him to the hoop. And I think that's been a really underrated aspect of this offensive season that he's had, because obviously he shot the ball incredibly well, and everybody knows that. He's bombing like 10 threes a game, shooting them at 40%. He's got a beautiful stroke, but I think his ball handling and his ability to get to the rim has been an underrated aspect of that.
Yeah, I think just watching him, what's really impressed me about Paul George since he got to OKC is just his defense. I mean, we know the tools he had offensively, and obviously we knew that he was, you know, an elite player both ways. But what he's done to OKC, I mean, last night I went to bed actually as soon as he had 2 steals in a row. It looked like OKC was going on a run, and Mike Malone called a timeout, and I figured, well, the Thunder are probably going to win this. I was tired. I had to go to bed. But I mean, that's just the kind of effect he has on the game. And, like, you know, a career high in steals last year. He had a real case to win Defensive Player of the Year. He's really come into his own since he went to the Thunder.
Yeah, it's actually insane when you consider the fact that Paul George is already a superstar and everyone knew it. But coming into this year, he had never averaged even 24 points per game in a season, which isn't necessarily a knock on him. It's just, you know, not everyone scores an insane volume. He's up to 28.6 points per game this year. So this is a guy, like, in his, 8th season, who's already been a perennial all-star, who's 28 years old, who somehow raised his career high in points per game by 5 full points this year, and like 7 points per game since last year. I want to say it doesn't make sense. I guess it's just a combination of a lot of things, including how maniacal of a worker he is, and I guess the work he put in his game in the offseason. But yet, the level of improvement that he's made in 1 year, you just never see this from a guy who was already at like a superstar kind of level. It's been fun to watch. And then, yeah, you mentioned the defensive side. Like, I think he should be the favorite for Defensive Player of the Year right now.
Yeah.
He's that good on the defensive end. He's leading the league in steals at 2.3. Like, the way he sees the floor defensively, the way he carries that Thunder team, and then to be able to do that and still do what he's doing on the other end, to average almost 29 points a game on 45, 40, 84 shooting splits is just insane. He's having a phenomenal year, and if it wasn't for Giannis Antetokounmpo and James Harden, he'd be a surefire MVP. But it also just kind of shows you the depth of star talent in the league right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I would put him at least on Harden's level as far as MVP candidates go. I think Giannis, to me, is still a cut above. But I think, Paul George deserves to be in that MVP conversation. He deserves definitely to be in the Defensive Player of the Year conversation. I think he maybe deserves to be in the Most Improved Player conversation because of all those things you mentioned and the leap that he has taken at this point in his career. I think is one that we didn't necessarily see coming, and is one that we don't see very often. So honestly, just an incredible season from him all around. But let's move on to some teams that we've been watching, and some that have maybe kind of gone under the radar a bit, but that are streaking nonetheless. Cash, I'll start with you. Who do you like?
The Pistons, and I guess that's weird because when you ask it, like, who do you like? I don't want to say the Pistons because I do not like the Pistons as a threatening team come the spring, but I think we got to give them their props for the kind of run that they're on recently. They haven't been exactly played a murderer's row of opponents, but they've won 7 of their last 8 games. This is a team that had kind of fallen out of the race a little bit and looked like they were fading, and instead they've won 7 of 8. They've won 3 in a row. They beat the Pacers the other night. They're only a game under 500 now. They're up to 7th in the East in what's kind of a sad playoff race, and they're only a game and a half back of the Nets for 6th, and they're tied with them in the loss column. So the Pistons went from kind of fading down the stretch to all of a sudden, trying to set up a first-round matchup with potentially an Oladipo's Pacers team. Like, this team's ceiling, at least for this season, drastically changed over the last couple weeks.
I think actually Andre Drummond's really picked it up, and that to me has been the biggest factor in their turnaround, if you want to call it that. He just looks a little bit faster, I think, and a little bit more engaged defensively. He's obviously been rebounding the hell out of the ball, as he always does. But I think he's been more, like, a lot of the times I feel like you can see him put up empty stats, but he, to me, has been an impact guy over the last month or so. And I think that's what's really been driving their recent success.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think it was Zach Lowe or somebody tweeted out that the basketball Drummond's played in the last couple weeks might be the best of his career. But if you look, this guy's a stat monster and has been at times. 2020 games. He actually had a 2020 game about a week ago. But no, he's playing smarter. And, that's a big part of what they're doing right now. I still think that they could use some more shooting in some capacity. I mean, but we'll see how it plays out. I think that, there's no reason coming into this season they shouldn't not have made the playoffs. And I think that they're putting their talent together at the right time now. And it would be great to see a matchup with the Raptors, just as an aside.
And right now it's set up to be just that, 2 versus 7.
Have a lot of traveling Raptors fans for that series, I think. And, I mean, look, the Pistons, we know what the issues are with this team. Like, their front court is great. Blake Griffin is having maybe the best season of his career. They don't have any wing depth. They don't have great point guard depth. And having Reggie Jackson as your starting point guard is, not ideal to begin with. But then also, they traded their best wing at the trade deadline in Reggie Bullock, which was a bit of a head-scratcher for me, and left them even thinner on the wing than they already were. So that would concern me a bit as they kind of look toward making this playoff push in the stretch run. But given that, it is the bottom of the Eastern Conference, there isn't a ton of competition, so I would expect them to make it in. Chick, who have you been keeping an eye on in terms of teams that are on a bit of a run right now?
Actually, kind of the Blazers. They're 11-4 in their last 15. They all got stuck in an elevator apparently yesterday. So, you would think that might help their bonding a little better. But the way they've been playing lately, to be fair, this streak, or not a streak, but their good play started against some bad teams. But if you look back at the last 2 weeks, they've beaten Golden State, Philly, Spurs, Utah. And since like mid-January, they got the best offensive rating, best net rating in the league. And I think a lot of this has to do with shoring up the front court. I mean, Enes Kanter's only been there for like 3 games, but he's already added a dimension they didn't have, which is a little bit more depth in the front court. When you got to rely so much on Dame and CJ, and you don't really have anything else, I mean, you're going to go through ebbs and flows. I think that, getting Kanter to come off the bench and pair him with Nurkic, who can be a beast when he wants to be. And CJ and Dame have found their synergy, I think. CJ had some bad games earlier in the season. So, it's all, as we know, it's all matchups in the playoffs. Last year they got a bad one with the Pelicans. I think that they could probably hang on a 3rd seed in the West.
There's got to be some kind of metaphor to make there with the Blazers being stuck in an elevator. No, it's like this team that is like, you can't really ever tell whether they're going up or down, and they've been stuck in this stage of being pretty good for a really long time. Sorry, Cash, what were you going to say?
Yeah, no, I just say, Wolfond, you know this, but I've kind of been beating the Blazers drum all year as this team that, like, I still don't know why so many people were out on them at the beginning of the year, because I still looked at that roster and I was like, they're still a playoff team. They've still got 2 star quality guards and 1 superstar level point guard. I just kind of feel like they're surviving. I don't want to call it a war of attrition in the West, but a lot of teams we thought could be contenders have ended up looking like pretenders this year in the West. And the Blazers have just kind of, other than a minor blip here and there, they've just kind of steadily rode the wave. They've beaten some good teams. They have a good win profile. They're obviously good at home. Like, everything's just kind of, steady Eddie for them, as it usually is, and they're going to finish with 50 wins again and make the playoffs again and probably get home court in the first round. They've just, because they haven't had the playoff success that fans want, I feel like this run they've been on the last whatever it is, like half decade, has kind of been underappreciated.
Yeah, I think that it was like by default, a lot of people thought that they were going to be the team that was going to fall out of the top 8 this year. I don't know. Every year you've got a candidate who that's going to be, and for some reason that was Portland. Now we see what other teams like the Lakers are doing, and here Portland is, right. But yeah, they're still a force to be reckoned with. I mean, they're still pretty solid, and if they get the right matchup, they can advance.
Also, shout out to Yusuf Nurkic for calling out Ben Simmons. I don't know if you guys saw that earlier this week, but
I didn't. What do you say?
Ben Simmons was shooting a free throw and missed it. And as it was in midair, I think Nurkic said something like, "No way," like or "no chance" or something like that. And then Ben Simmons walks up to Nurkic and says, "You talk a lot of trash." Essentially, I'll paraphrase, but said,
"Right,
you talk a lot of trash for someone who's so ass." And then Nurkic, after the game, told reporters that, like, even as a big man, he's a better shooter than Ben Simmons. Stuff like that. And I just loved it because, like, listen, Ben Simmons is a great player, but at the same time, Nurkic is also a good young big man having a good year, and you can't be calling out other good players when opposing teams practically guard you from courtside seats, okay? Like, they don't have to stand on the court to guard you. You can't be talking trash.
Yeah, he's not talking to Myers Leonard. I mean, he's talking to Yusuf Nurkic. I mean, you got to think twice about that.
The Blazers, like, low-key have a bit of an edge. I mean, Zach Collins, I don't know if you guys saw that Warriors game when he got into it with Klay Thompson, and there's a clip where you can kind of read his lips. And I won't repeat the lip reading, but that team's got a little bit of a nasty streak, and I like that. Nurkic also is just, first of all, having an unbelievable year at both ends of the floor, and I think that is really what raises this team's ceiling. First of all, they've activated him as a playmaker a little bit more. They run more of their offense through the high post, and they're doing a much better job of cutting off of Nurkic, who I think is just really good at making those backdoor passes. But also just like as a rim protector, he's been unbelievable. And if you look like in terms of real plus minus, player impact plus minus, box plus minus, pretty much any advanced metric has painted him as like a top 20 player in the league this season. He's been awesome and probably their second best player, I want to say. given that McCollum has, I think, sort of leveled out. Like, we know what he is at this point, which is a very good scorer, a guy who can get his own shot. And, look, his playmaking has been in a state of arrested development for a couple of years now. I think it's a little bit disappointing. Defensively, he's probably a minus. So I think Nurkic has been the Blazers' second best player.
I think he's been more consistent for sure, yeah.
But he's also a guy who's just like, from the moment he stepped into the NBA, has been talking trash. Like, he as a rookie was talking trash to like Mark Gasol and Zach Randolph, and there was never any back down in that guy. So I like this Blazers team as well, and they have a pretty soft schedule down the stretch. So I think they can walk into 50 wins pretty easily. And I agree with Chick. I think how far they go in the playoffs is really going to be determined by the matchups. But without a doubt, I can see them winning a round this year. Asking for more than that, I don't know. But I definitely think we could see them in the second round. I wouldn't be too surprised. My team is the Orlando Magic, which I will admit doesn't look great in light of the fact that they just lost to the suddenly red-hot New York Knicks.
Yeah, I thought this was going to go with the Knicks for the team on the move. They won 2 in a row, man.
2 in a row.
They won 2 in a row.
Yeah. Turning things around after that 17-game losing streak. So, but before that loss to the Knicks, and also they lost by a point to the Chicago Bulls. But in between those 2 games, they dummied the Toronto Raptors for the second time this season. And then just before the All-Star break, they absolutely obliterated the Charlotte Hornets, a team that they are chasing for a playoff spot and also for Southeast Division supremacy, if you want to call it that. The Southeast Division, just an epic tire fire. And I am feeling pretty good about my preseason prediction that division winner would end up with 38 wins. I said it would be the Wizards, so not feeling great about that. But I do think that division is going to be won by a sub-500 team, which is just crazy. And even crazier to think that like a few years ago, that team would have ended up with a top 3 seed. Yeah. But again, like before they hit this kind of rough patch with those losses to the Bulls and the Knicks, the Magic were just beating up on teams, and not like pushover teams. They beat the Bucks by 20 points. No Giannis in that game, but even so, a Giannis-less Bucks team has proven to be pretty good. They beat the Wolves by 10. They beat the Hawks by 16. They beat the Pelicans by 30, and they beat the Hornets by 38. They beat the Pacers before that. They beat the Nets. They've been pretty consistently good for a couple of weeks now. And honestly, all season long, I've sort of had this feeling about this team that they could be a little bit more, because I actually like the talent they have on the team. It's just kind of the same old story where their roster is fairly imbalanced, and the vast majority of their talent exists in the front court. And, without a particularly good starting point guard and without a whole lot of depth on the wing, it makes it a bit of a challenge. But defensively, I like the steps that Aaron Gordon has taken this season, even though offensively I think he remains a bit stunted. And obviously, Nikola Vucevic has just been a monster. And his ability now to beat people up in the post or to stretch them out makes him a matchup nightmare for most centers in the league. I'm really interested to see what kind of contract he gets in the offseason, because the center market is obviously so saturated. But I think there are a couple teams who need a center who, look, if you were choosing between Vucevic and Cousins who you wanted to pay, I think I would pick Vucevic, and it would be a no-brainer.
Yeah, that's... Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just saying, he's his health is more of a sure thing right now, and he's probably, if you're talking just about the offensive end, there are not many big men with a more complete packet, complete game than Nikola Vucevic. As Joe mentioned, he can beat you up inside, and he's almost automatic down low, but then he can stretch you out. He can hit a mid-range jumper. He can punish you from the perimeter. He can move the ball. He sees the floor well. There's really not much offensively that the guy can't do.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously with Boogie, the question marks are coming off the Achilles injury too. I mean, there's a lot of question marks there. Vucevic, this is a career season for him. He had another big year about 4 years ago. He ran into some injuries and some other issues. Played for some bad teams as well that had way too many centers. But yeah, no, it's going to be really interesting with him actually too. I mean, we wonder like, is there a lot of interest for a traditional five? But this guy can be a dominant player, and if I'm not mistaken, he is 29. So yeah, I mean, and as far as what he's doing for the Magic this year, yeah, I mean, this team. Like Wolfond's right. I mean, they've had talent for a couple of years. It's certainly front-loaded, but I mean, with Steve Clifford coming in, he's a defensive-minded coach. I think he's got these guys playing the right way. They definitely could use a better point guard, like in a starting caliber point guard anyway. I don't know how far they're going to go in the playoffs, but I mean, Evan Fournier said a couple of weeks ago, he said like, we need to make the playoffs or this is it for this iteration of the Orlando Magic, and it may be it for this iteration if Vucevic moves on too. So, it's good to see. This is a team, I think they have like the third longest playoff drought in the NBA, so it'll be nice to see them get in.
They have a soft schedule down the stretch. I kind of expect them to end up winning the Southeast, and I think they could climb as high as sixth in the East because the Nets have a pretty tough schedule down the stretch. So. Yeah, I would definitely expect to see that team in the playoffs, and I know it's no great achievement to make the playoffs in the Eastern Conference, but I think it's pretty important for that team that hasn't made it in so long to just get at least a couple of home playoff games. And, I think them keeping Vucevic through the deadline definitely signaled an indication that they would like to keep him around for a little bit longer than that. And I don't think that's such a bad idea given how far away Mo Bamba looked to be when he was playing.
Yeah.
And I really like the strides that Jonathan Isaac has taken. I have a lot of high hopes for him. I think, maybe they can sign him to a shorter-term deal, 2 or 3 years, and ride that out until Bamba's ready. And maybe, I don't know, maybe Aaron Gordon is the guy that they decide to trade. Obviously, it's not entirely tenable the way that they've constructed their roster right now. And they're going to have a lot of interesting decisions to make this offseason. But as far as this season goes, I expect to see them in the playoffs.
Yeah. Aaron Gordon not being a natural small forward is kind of part, as much as they need a point guard, that's also like a big part of their roster instability and just like how ill-fitting it is because they try to cram him into the three with, Isaac and Vucevic, and it just like doesn't work. I don't know how much longer we have to watch Aaron Gordon at the three to realize he's more of a small ball four. The other thing that, didn't mean to laugh at you there, Joe, but I just, when you said they'd win the Southeast Division, I don't know if anyone wins the Southeast Division as much as they survive whatever that division is. So the entire Southeast Division right now takes up the 8 to 12 spots in the East.
Yeah. It's
whoever wins this better not hang any kind of division title banner. If they do, then if someone hangs a division banner for winning the 2019 Southeast, Adam Silver should punish them the same way like you can be punished for like severe tampering. You should take away a draft pick or something because that would be just a disgrace to the game.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'll just say that a lot of these teams are sort of sad sack franchises that I think need just anything good to happen to them and something that they can sell their fans. And, going into next season, I am 100% certain that whichever team wins this division is going to be selling season ticket packages and promos with the headline, Southeast Division champion Orlando Magic, gearing up for a big 2019-20 season.
Can they improve on their 39-43 division winning year?
Yeah, I think we're all excited to find out. Let's move over to the Western Conference, though, where another playoff race is taking shape. And the way I see it, there are 5 teams who are in the mix for the final 2 playoff spots out west. And those teams are the Clippers, the Spurs, the Kings, the Lakers, and the Timberwolves, who, the Wolves I don't think have really been talked about as a team that is in this playoff mix. But they are right there now, tied with the Lakers for 10th place. Both those teams 3 games out of a playoff spot. And surprisingly, it's the Clippers who are in 7th right now at 34-28. They've gone 4-3 since trading Tobias Harris. I think a lot of people expected that they would fall out, which may still happen. I think a lot of people also expected that their preference would be to fall out. because the Clippers owe a lottery-protected first-round draft pick to the Boston Celtics, so they only get to keep that pick if they miss the playoffs. But Steve Ballmer went on TV last week and said that the Clippers have every intention of making the playoffs, which, I mean, what's he supposed to say, really? But it seems like they are, perfectly content to ride this thing out. And as much as, they traded their best player, they don't seem to have gotten that much worse. I mean, the teams they've beaten since then have not been particularly impressive opponents, but I think sneakily, like, they actually made some nice supplementary moves at the deadline, getting, JaMychal Green, Garrett Temple. Montrezl Harrell has just continued consuming souls. I don't know, man. Do you guys see this team as one of the two remaining playoff seeds?
Yeah, I think that they might just hold on to a playoff spot. I think, for me, the big thing is, okay, yes, they lost their best player in Tobias Harris, but the strength of this Clippers team was that they essentially have no bad players, like, up and down this roster. Everyone they put on the core is, like, at the very least, an NBA caliber rotation talent, and that hasn't changed even after the Tobias trade. Like, their rotation is still stocked full of, good players, average at the very worst. The issue with them is, the reason they won't do anything once the playoffs come is because they don't have that, like, star level talent that can take over a game. But losing
How are you going to do your Paisan like that, Cash?
Yeah, listen, I was going to bring up when you said they traded their best player to Tobias Harris. I was like, I didn't know Gallo already changed his name to Tobias Harris. But no, look, Gallo, even if you look at a lot of the advanced metrics, like, Gallo leads the Clippers in a lot of ways, and they're just a lot worse without him.
Gallo would tell you that too, as he recently tweeted out the real plus minus offensive leaderboard where he was sitting in 10th place. So,
but no, he's having a great offensive year. He is what he is. Yeah, as I was saying, the Clippers, nothing changed about them for me. They got a little thinner, I guess, in terms of top-end talent, but they didn't have much of it anyway. They're still good enough and deep enough to make the playoffs. They're just not talented enough to do anything once there.
Yeah, I think it's going to depend on the other teams in the race, too. I think that, the Clippers, they probably do have the talent to make the playoffs. And, I mean, they got Lou off the bench. Like you said, Gallo. I mean, Montrezl Harrell has been pretty fun to watch the last couple weeks. And I mean, with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander as well, I mean, they got these younger players that you kind of want to see excel, but, they're still in the learning curve as well. So, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if they fell out. I think I was looking at, now I don't have their schedule right in front of me, but their last 5 games of the season are pretty tough, and they play the Lakers in there. And the Lakers' schedule in that last 5 games is pretty tough, too. So this could be a pretty crazy final fortnight, I guess, to the season when we get into, like, March and April. So I think a lot of it's going to play out then. I wouldn't be surprised if they fell out, though.
So for the record, remaining strength of schedule in terms of difficulty, and this is from Basketball Reference, so it basically only takes into account opponent record, not sort of home road splits or back-to-backs or anything like that. But in terms of opponent record, the Lakers have the most difficult schedule of these 5 teams, followed by the Wolves, followed by the Clippers, followed by the Kings, followed by the Spurs. So the Kings and Spurs have the 2 easiest schedules of these teams down the stretch. And the Lakers have the most difficult, which is going to make things tough for them because they are already 3 games out. But let's talk about the Spurs, because this looked for a while to be a team that was going to coast into the playoffs. Through the middle portion of the season, I think they were really starting to pick things up. Their defense had seemed to improve quite a bit, and they were running, at least for a month-long stretch, the most efficient offense in the NBA. They have hit a really, really rough patch here. Their rodeo trip went disastrously. They went 1-7, got outscored by an average of 14 points a game. They gave up 130 points to the Knicks, and now they're down to 8th place and only a game up on the Kings. Where do you guys see the Spurs season ending up? Because right now they have a playoff streak of 21 years on the line, and it definitely looks to be in jeopardy.
I still think they figured out a way to get in. To me, the Spurs are kind of what a lot of us thought they'd be at this point of the season, a lower half West playoff team with a really bad defense because they don't have good defenders. But look, they're going to get a lot more home games now. Their schedule turns a little bit for them. I know, like Joe was just mentioning, the strength of schedule. They've got, out of the 5 teams we're talking about, they've got the easiest schedule. And I think they just find a way to kind of stay in there, whether it's the 7 or 8 seed. I just believe in Pop too much. I know there's only certain things a coach can do, and you're seeing that with how bad they are defensively, but I still think they find a way to grab either the 7th or the 8th seed. And I don't think they're the threat they once were, obviously, come springtime, but there's still enough here, and there's still enough good coaching and discipline and all that goes into it to kind of stay level-headed through this to right the ship. But the rodeo road trip was unlike anything I've ever seen. The Spurs usually at least kind of tread water during these long trips, and they just got obliterated, including by some bad teams. Like, that game against the Knicks was unbelievable.
And again, the Knicks came into that game on a 17-game losing streak, so it's really hard to overstate what a bad loss that was. So, Cash, if you think they'll get in, and you think the Clippers will also get in?
No, listen, I think the Clippers, they do still have enough talent to get in, is all I was saying, even after the Tobias trade, but I don't think they will. I think if I had to put money on it, I'd say, honestly, I think the Spurs and Kings take those last 2 spots.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm mostly with Cash on that one in terms of the Spurs for sure. I mean, we know exactly what this team is. We saw their problems defensively early on in the season, so a lot of people were writing them off then, and they kind of righted the ship. They were up, I think, as high as 6th at some point, maybe even higher at one point. But, yeah, I mean, this is Greg Popovich we're talking about. I mean, he's got an odd collection of players right now. It's kind of trying to fit, square pegs and round holes kind of thing. But he's been doing it, if there's any coach who can do that, it's Pop. And, I mean, the talent they do have, well, it doesn't necessarily fit. I mean, there are some good players there still. I think that rodeo road trip must have been I think I read it was their worst rodeo road trip in during their playoff streak, going back to like 97 or something like that. But yeah, no, I guess it's just like history bias, but I would probably put the Spurs in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, I always remember that rodeo road trip as being the point of the season where the Spurs really establish their dominance over the rest of the league. And, historically, that's been, they go on this crazy run, and it tends to start or at least encompass that road trip. And it's just another example of how this team has changed. And unfortunately, they are just not the dynastic force that they once were. And now they just find themselves fighting for a playoff spot. So let's talk about the Kings, who are chasing the Spurs down. They're 1 game back, and while the Spurs have made the playoffs 21 years in a row, the Kings have not made the playoffs in 13 years. That is the longest active streak in the league, thanks to the Timberwolves breaking their own playoff drought last year. What do you guys think about the Kings' chances?
I like it.
Go ahead, Cash.
Oh, no, yeah, go ahead. I was just saying I like them.
Yeah, no, I mean, like we were saying earlier, I mean, they've got an exciting collection of young players. And, I mean, that might be the operative keyword is young. I think what works for him is Dave Yeager. He's a great coach. This is kind of what the position he wanted to be in. There were rumors early in the season that, the typical Kings dysfunction, that maybe they wanted to go just strictly in the youth direction. Yeager didn't want to be a part of that because he wanted to, actually compete for a playoff spot. And now they're basically right in the race. It's exactly where he wanted to be. So I like their chances based on that alone. And, I mean, we were talking about De'Aaron Fox earlier. It's a very exciting player. Buddy Hield, just unconscious 3-point shooting. I think he might have cooled a little bit lately, but for a while he was just lights out. And, I mean, yeah, you've got some interesting front court players as well. I guess, again, with them, it's like I want to see them make the playoffs because I like what they can bring to the table. It's just that I start to ask, well, what about these other teams? It all really comes back to the Lakers, I think. We're going to talk about them in a minute. But yeah, I mean, everybody's question mark is LeBron James going to miss the playoffs for, the first time since, there was no Twitter. So, I mean, when you start thinking about things like that, I mean, did the Kings have the horses to do that? I mean, the way the Lakers are playing, yeah, probably. But, I mean, I think there's just so many balls up in the air. I like their chances, but if somebody goes on a tear, then they could get bumped out.
Yeah, a couple things with the Kings. I mean, to piggyback on your point about Buddy Hield, I feel like maybe not enough has been made of the fact that he's shooting 45% from three on 7.6 attempts per game. That is insane.
That's crazy.
And I think Bagley, look, they finally inserted Bagley into the starting lineup. After, you guys might remember, sort of early in the season, there was a bit of contention between the front office and Dave Yeager about him starting Bielitsa over Bagley. Bagley has played his way into that starting lineup, and he's been great. And I actually think, on top of his kind of offensive prowess, and I think, he's still pretty one-hand dominant, but it almost doesn't matter because of his ability to just overpower guys. But I think that he is not the defensive liability that a lot of people thought he would be. He is still obviously a rookie and makes a lot of rookie mistakes, but I think looking down the road, I don't think he's necessarily going to be a defensive minus by any means. And, regardless of what happens with this team, I just think this is going to be the most exciting team of this group to watch and to see how they handle the pressure of this playoff chase, because this is the first such moment for a lot of these guys. And, how they handle it, I think, is going to be pretty telling. Unfortunately, Harrison Barnes has just been terrible since they acquired him. He seemed like the sort of veteran presence that would maybe help steady the ship a little bit. And that might still be the case, but he's had a bit of a rough go in his first few games with the Kings. Okay. So I guess we should talk about the Lakers now. And look, we're going to be talking about this from now until we know what their playoff fate is going to be. This has just been a dominant storyline all season long, and it's going to continue to be for as long as we don't know whether or not LeBron is going to miss the playoffs. So here's where we're at with the Lakers. They are 29-31. They're 3 games out. LeBron famously said that he was activating playoff mode after the All-Star break, and we have all seen what playoff LeBron looks like. It is a terrifying sight. This is not playoff LeBron. It just isn't. And I don't know, and I think this is probably the most pertinent question for the Lakers right now. I don't know if this is something that he can't do because he is physically compromised, because that groin injury is still bothering him, or he isn't fully back in shape yet, or whether this is just something that he won't do because he's checked out, because he doesn't really see the point in pushing hard to make the playoffs with a team that is probably going to get bounced in the first round anyway. So that to me is the big question. Like, is this a can't do or a won't do type of thing for LeBron? Because again, this is not LeBron in playoff mode, and the Lakers, for all the flack that their defense has taken, and LeBron defensively has not been good, they rank 22nd in the league on offense this season, which for a LeBron James-led team is unthinkable. And I just, again, like, they have the toughest remaining schedule of any of these teams. It is going to be a monumental task for them to get in. And I think if you had told me at the start of the season that LeBron James was going to miss a month and the Lakers were going to miss the playoffs, I wouldn't have been that surprised. But the way that it has unfolded, this isn't like they've been overwhelmed by the ridiculous quality of the Western Conference. Like, they are below 500, and even just to watch their games, they look so despondent. And I don't know. I think if I had to guess, I would say that they missed the playoffs, which is crazy.
Yeah, this is what happens when you build the team around LeBron James that Johnson and Rob Pelinka have built. That the young guys haven't taken the steps forward that a lot of people hope for, and it's weird because so Ingram and Kuzma have actually been playing well lately, but it hasn't happened within the confines of like a productive team. Is what's kind of strange about it. It's almost like those guys are making their leaps, but they're doing it like outside of the team, and the team is still bad as a whole. They still don't have enough shooting. The defense has been up and down all year. As Joe mentioned, their scoring is inefficient as hell, which doesn't make much sense, even when LeBron's on the court. There's just a lot that doesn't make sense with this team, and it goes back to the beginning of the year and the way they built this roster, that anyone with half a basketball mind could see that it wasn't an optimal roster to surround LeBron with. And yeah, then he misses a month, And now Lonzo's out, and Lonzo actually is really important to what they do. He's, for all the jokes about his shooting and his dad, he's probably one of the more underrated players in the league in terms of his on-court impact.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're seeing that right now. And yeah, this team's just not good, like full stop. We're in late February, and they're under 500. And Joe kind of hit it on the head. They haven't been overwhelmed by the talent of the West. I think they've been more overwhelmed by how underwhelming their own team is. And how mentally fragile they are. And look, I know it's very easy for us to, sit here and talk about, how the young guys should just get over it. Obviously, it's different to actually be in that situation, to be a pro athlete who doesn't know whether they're going to be on the move or what the case may be, to know that your, team tried to trade you away for a bigger name. But at the end of the day, like, they are not the first set of youngsters that have had to deal with it. So, put on your big boy pants and get to work and, try to help this team make the playoffs. Because right now, this team just looks like three different teams at once. LeBron kind of looks like a one-man show, at least on the offensive end. He's not doing anything on the defensive end. And like I mentioned, the young guys are playing well, but it's not really translating to the game. LeBron's seemingly calling out the young guys for, maybe this isn't for them if the pressure's getting to them, but then he's also not exactly playing up to 100% capabilities. There's just so much going on with this team. Luke Walton's clearly fallen out of favor, even with their fans. If you just log on Twitter, and I know Twitter's not the best outlet to find reasoned takes, but still, I think
no team's fan base is happy with its coach. Let's be honest.
Yeah, but I was gonna say, I think you can kind of find a fan base's pulse on social media, and this fan base has been out on Walton for a while now this season. Yeah, there's just a lot going on with this team, and none of it is good. And we've all learned to not doubt LeBron James many times before, especially in the playoffs. But right now, you're looking at a Lakers team that needs to overcome a 3-game deficit with 22 games left and one of the toughest schedules in the league. I just don't know if I see it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, and this goes back to the thing you wrote, Wolfond, back in July. I think it was entitled, "What the hell are the Lakers doing?" After they signed Rondo. And I mean, this is basically the end result of that. I mean, this team doesn't make much sense. And, but the thing is, and the reason I will never totally rule them out is because of LeBron. But like you said, at the same time, we don't know if this is a case right now where he's checked out. We know he's not 100% himself since a groin injury. But, those last 5 games, which I was looking at, the last 5 games of the season are going to be very tough. But at the same time, if LeBron decides to pour it on and score 48 a night, I wouldn't call it impossible. Is it likely at this point? No. And the next best player on the team is Kyle Kuzma, who's 23 years old. So this team isn't going anywhere. So there's a real possibility that this was a lifestyle decision first and foremost for LeBron by going to LA this year. He's tweeting more. He's hanging out with 2 Chainz the night before he misses a game. So maybe his decisions haven't been good his first year in Southern California. They say that city can mess with your head a little bit.
They're in pre-production for Space Jam 2 already.
That's right. So I mean, and I think when Rich Paul made that push to get Anthony Davis and it didn't work out, maybe LeBron just said, yeah, you know what, maybe I'm going to take May and June off this year, and we'll try and get things together next year, whoever that is. But we'll find out, like I said, down the stretch. You just can't ever rule him out. We saw what he did in the playoffs in 2015. With the Cavs when Kyrie and Kevin Love went down, but that team had to get there first, so LeBron could do that. So I don't think that's the same comparison at all, but you can never rule them out.
And I also...
The weird thing to me is, it's one thing if, we've seen, chill mode LeBron before, which is kind of what he's doing right now, especially on the defensive end. It's one thing if that's just is what it is, and people were talking about whether his groin is healthy and how engaged he was with this team. The thing I don't understand is why LeBron came out and said he was activating playoff mode. If he wasn't going to kind of go balls to the wall, full throttle, and that level of play we all know he can obviously still get to, that can just absolutely take a game over and almost will his teams to win unless it's the Warriors.
Yeah, and
I don't understand why he said he would do it if he knew he wasn't.
And that's the thing too, right? Like you saw it the other night, the day after he says that, he looks like an extra in a movie on defense. Like guys are just blowing by him. He's standing around. But we saw that last year too. Late in the Cavs season, people are calling out his lack of defense. Maybe he's saving himself for the stretch run offensively anyway. Yeah, he's really going to have to really turn it up at some point, for real. I mean, rather than just pay lip service to media questions, if they're going to do this. But again, like we said, there's a possibility that he might be ready just to punt on this season. I don't know.
I know this doesn't really matter, but like, why do they trade Zubac? Their center rotation is a mess. JaVale McGee has regressed hard, and Zubac might have been their best center, and they traded him for Mike Muscala. That just makes no sense to me. And like,
it's almost like Magic Johnson and Kobe's agent aren't good at like team building.
I mean, I like the move to go and get Reggie Bullock. I think that showed some actual. I don't know if it's foresight, but at least like it was an acknowledgement that, hey, look, we need to put some shooters around LeBron. Like we got this wrong. But then they had Zubac, who's a young center who, look, he's not a star or anything, but he was playing quite well. And again, they could use whatever center depth they can get. And again, on the list of Lakers problems, this is pretty low, but it's like these things have compounding effects. And I didn't understand that trade at all.
Yeah, I think the logic to Muscala was to get a shooter as well with some size, which if you're getting Muscala for shooting alone, I don't know if that's the greatest deal. But
yeah, sure. But I think, you still need to have a rim runner. And I think, LeBron has played pretty well with guys who have that skill set. So it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But we should probably move on. We have not really talked about the Timberwolves in a long time. And it's funny because this team was sort of at the center of the NBA universe for a large portion of the start of the season with the Jimmy Butler drama, then the Jimmy Butler trade, then Tom Thibodeau's firing, and then, the sort of bump that the team got in the wake of all those things happening. After the Butler trade, they went on a crazy run. After Thibodeau got fired, they had a couple really nice wins under Ryan Saunders. And they've sort of faded into the background, and I think a lot of people forgot about them. But here they are. They're right where the Lakers are at 29-31. They have an easier schedule down the stretch. And if we look at the teams in this mix, you take the Lakers out of the equation, and the Wolves have the best player by far. So are we sleeping on this team? Do they have a chance to get in ahead of maybe, the Kings or the Spurs or the Clippers?
Yeah, I think they do. I think that this is probably one of the teams that could get in, and the two of these 5 teams fighting for that spot. They've got playoff experience on the roster. I mean, it's not a lot, but I think that does count for something sometimes down the stretch. Karl Anthony Towns went off the other night, a day after he got into a car accident. He sounded like he was pretty shaken up about the accident. I don't know, maybe something like that could have a tendency to inspire him. But I mean, I like the makeup of the team. I mean, I have a lot of question marks about Andrew Wiggins, but I mean, I think this is a playoff team with the players they've got. I think that's a fair assumption. I think Ryan Saunders is in a position where he can get these guys, motivate these guys to win down the stretch, and if they've got one of the easier schedules, which apparently they do, if the Lakers are going to kind of fall by the wayside, this is a team that should be able to get in there.
It's interesting, too, because they've actually beaten the Clippers and the Kings in the last 2 weeks, including the Kings just a couple of nights ago. So, those were obviously huge wins to keep them in this race. But I know in terms of, the actual numbers of their strength of schedule, it's one of the easier ones out of the 5 teams we're talking about. But I still look at that schedule and don't think the Timberwolves will be able to manage it. They still play the Thunder. They play the Nuggets a couple of times. They play the Raptors. They play the Warriors twice. They play Philly. I still don't think – I think they play Houston and Utah on the road as well. There's still a lot of games in there that I just don't trust this Timberwolves team to win. And as those add up, their tragic number is going to shrink.
Big swing factor to me is Covington and whether he can make it back. He's been out for, I think, 6 weeks now with this ankle injury. And it's really hard to overstate the impact that he had on that team when he was healthy. And, if he can make it back, I think that might be the push that they need in order to get in. I think, look, Josh Okogie has done a really good job of filling in, but Covington ultimately is a better defender than Okogie is, and he's a much, much better shooter. So, that I think could make a big difference for them. And even if they want to keep Okogie in the rotation and Covington does make it back, I think it's probably Andrew Wiggins' minutes who is going to get it eaten into because I've really tried to be so patient with Wiggins and have always preached this, mentality that, look, he's still young, he's got time. After that, it was, I still think he has some nice skills here, and if you pare down his role and, get him to basically be an off-the-catch attacker who doesn't try to do too much, then he can still be effective for you. I'm just at a point right now where I don't think he is contributing to winning at all. And if Covington can make it back, I think, I'm not saying like they would excise him from the rotation, but for his role to be scaled back, I think would be a good thing for them.
Agree.
Yeah, Covington was, before he got hurt, whether it was Philly or Minnesota, the guy was looking like a potential all-defensive first-team member this year. Like, he was that good on the defensive end, while providing some shooting on the other end. And as for Wiggins, yeah, I mean, look, I think we all had hopes for him and thought he would turn it around, but we're talking about a guy now who's now 5 years into his NBA career and has the exact same concerns surrounding him as he had in college 5 years ago, which was that, his motor just isn't there. His effort is inconsistent. He's very lackadaisical. And we're seeing the product of that. Like, the guy, if he hasn't regressed, he's stagnated at best.
Yeah.
There's no development there. There's no reason to think it's going to come while he's now making a good $1 billion a year.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think we're starting to get to that point, and he's got 4 years left on that mammoth extension, so that's not great news for Minnesota. But what is good news for them is that they have more depth, I think, than they've had in a really long time. And Taj Gibson's coming off the bench now. Saric has been inserted in the starting lineup. He's been playing great. Derrick Rose continues to, surprisingly be pretty effective coming off of the bench. I've always been a big Tyus Jones fan. Luol Deng, weirdly enough, has played really well off the bench. He's got a bit of pep in his step after taking a year and a half off of basketball, basically. So I like this team, and I said this at the time that they made that Jimmy Butler trade. If you just showed me this team on paper at the start of the season without all the drama and the 4-9 start that they got off to, I would think this is a playoff team. So if they can get healthy, if Covington can come back, I actually think that they might surprise some people and end up in that mix. But let's wrap up here just really quickly, talking about the TNT doubleheader we saw last night. The Raptors beat the hell out of the Celtics, and then the Nuggets built a big lead on the Thunder, survived a big comeback, and pulled away at the end of the game. I'll just get one quick thought from each of you about both of those games. So, Cash, what was your takeaway from Raptors Celtics?
The Celtics are broken spiritually, and then real quickly, just the Raptors are a much smarter team, especially moving the ball, than they were a few weeks ago because of the additions to Gasol and Lin.
Yeah, I think, for the Raptors, that's probably the game that a lot of fans have been waiting for, where they kind of everything came together and executed. I think that Boston playing terribly had something to do with that, though, and I think that they have real concerns. My thought on Boston all season long has been that, maybe they just hadn't put it together because, they've got the wealth of talent all healthy. But now I really ask if Kyrie Irving's capable of leading a team anywhere. I mean, he was behind LeBron in Cleveland. And I think the Celtics are kind of a mess. I mean, I still think they're a good, well-coached team, but Kyrie didn't seem to give his coach a lot of props last night after that game. So, I'm not high on the Celtics right now.
Food for thought, the Celtics are 9-2 when Kyrie doesn't play this season, and only 28-22 when he does play. He's been awesome, so I can't entirely explain that. Except to say that game they played against the Sixers was illuminating in the sense that when Kyrie isn't out there, the Celtics defense does not really have a weak spot that you can exploit. When it's Marcus Smart out there instead of Kyrie, they're basically just running out an army of strong, switchable defenders. So not having a place to attack is, a pretty big advantage. And ultimately, I don't think they're better off without Kyrie. I just think, like you said, Cash, there's something that is a little bit broken there right now. And I have been, kind of cautiously optimistic that they would turn things around at some point in time, but that is being tested at this moment. Let's talk quickly about Nuggets Thunder. Nikola Jokic, just an unbelievable showing in this game. Did Steven Adams pretty dirty all game long. And Steven Adams is a really good defender. But he had no answer for Jokic, who finished with 35, 10, and 9. Cash, any big sweeping takeaways from this game? You know, between two teams that I think we'd probably say are in contention for, you know, being the second best team in the West right now.
Yeah, I think it was another kind of signature win and signature season for the Nuggets and for Jokic. And I'd just say that Jokic, for whatever reason, gives the Thunder problems. He always has, this season especially. And yes, Steven Adams, you know, I'm a big fan of what he does on the court and obviously a great defensive player. But for some reason, Jokic just always gets the best of him. And you do wonder if that carries over to the spring, if these two teams do meet in, say, like a 2 versus 3 second-round matchup, if that could be the difference.
Yeah, it was kind of an old school center post matchup, and yeah, I mean, obviously everything's different in the playoffs. You know, benches tighten up. I think that Denver kind of still scares me a little bit, even though they're a top 10 defensive team right now. I just question, you know, how that's going to work in the playoffs. I mean, I think that if they get home court, which they will have at least through a couple of rounds at the rate they're going, they'll be fine because it's very hard to win in Denver. They're best home record in the league. But like, I look at OKC, yeah, and these two teams are probably the next two best teams in the West after Golden State. You know, there's a bit of a drop from the Warriors, but yeah, I mean, if last night was any indication, I think that it could be an entertaining playoff series. I still wouldn't rule the Thunder out, though.
Yeah, to me, the Rockets are really the only team that can kind of crash that party. But if I came away with a big takeaway from this game, it was just that I would absolutely love to see 7 games of this in the second round, because I think these teams are both really fun, really interesting. And I like the way that they match up with each other. I think that would be an awesome and fascinating series. And I think, like you were saying, if the Nuggets have home court, they're 27-4 at home this year. They're really tough to beat in that building. But, you know, they would also be at an experience deficit. The Thunder, obviously a team that has kind of been through it and has a lot more playoff-hardened players than the Nuggets do. So I think that would be super interesting, as last night's game was. But that's going to do it for this week's show.